Welcome to another lesson on iBuddy. Today we will be discussing the importance of biodiversity. To start, let's begin with what we know so far. That includes the life on Earth and ecosystems. So, as far as we know, Earth is the only planet that can sustain what is called life. Earth is also a place where a living thing's lives is called its habitat. Now, habitats can be terrestrial, such as a forest, or aquatic. Now, to differentiate these two, you can think of terrestrial as land and aquatic as water, in order to memorize and differentiate these two. Now that we've got that covered, let's move on to the spheres on the Earth. Now, all life on Earth is in the biosphere. The biosphere is composed of three parts. The first one being the atmosphere, which is a layer of gases above the Earth, composed mostly of 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. Now, the other 1% can be a combination of other gases in small concentrations. Now, the atmosphere regulates Earth's temperature and blocks most UV radiation. Moving on to the lithosphere. The lithosphere is a solid layer of rocks and minerals. The lithosphere is found from top of mountains to the ocean floor. Now, the third and final sphere on Earth found is the hydrosphere. Hydrosphere is all water under, on, or above Earth's surface. Now, take a moment to look at this diagram. This diagram displays all of the spheres found on Earth. Here, we have the biosphere, which contains all three: the atmosphere, lithosphere, and hydrosphere. Over here, the lithosphere shows all the rocks on Earth from the top of the mountain all the way to the ocean floor, which would be somewhere down here. Now, on to our left, the hydrosphere, which includes all the water on Earth, as you can see on the left side. And the atmosphere is the layer on Earth made up of gases, 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. This diagram is easy to understand and visualize where all three of these spheres are on Earth. Moving on to ecosystems. Now, an ecosystem is a complex, self-regulating system in which living things interact with each other, as well as non-living things. Terrestrial ecosystems are mostly based on land, as I've mentioned before, where aquatic ecosystems are based mostly in water. Now, living components of an ecosystem are called biotic factors. While non-living components of an ecosystem are called abiotic factors. Now, let's move on to understand the biotic components. Now, first, organic matter. Organic matter is the waste from living things and the remains of dead things. Now, to summarize, organic matter is the waste from living things and the remains of dead things. Now moving on to living things. Now, there are several ways you can identify living things. The main two living things are producers and consumers. Producers are organisms that make their own food through the sun's energy through a process called cellular respiration. Now, consumers are organisms that eat other organisms as food. Now, consumers are in multiple forms, the main being herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, scavengers, and finally, decomposers. Now, herbivores are organisms that only eat plants/producers. Now, carnivores are organisms that eat animals. Now, omnivores are special type organisms because they eat plants and animals. Scavengers are organisms that eat the remains of dead animals, while decomposers are organisms that break down animal bodies and waste. Now that we've got that covered, let's move on to the organization of organisms. Now, looking at this example over here, a member of a collection, set, or group. For example, a single zebra. Now, to remember this, we'd call these an individual. Single organism. So an individual is a member of a collection, set, or group. For example, a single zebra, a single elephant, a single dog, a single cat, etc. Now, another part here is all organisms of the same species living together in the same area. Notice how same species and same area are both underlined and bolded. This would help us indicate that it is a population. A population is all organisms of the same species living together in the same area. For example, a pack of lions living together. Now, moving on to the next example, populations of different species living in the same area and interacting with each other. For example, all these animals live together in the African desert. We would call this a community. Now, to reiterate, a community is a population of different species living in the same area and interacting with one another. Think of this as a next step up from a population. Now, moving on to the final part, we have a complex community of plants and animals living in a large area having a similar climate. Notice how here similar climate is highlighted and bolded and underlined. So this would mean we could qualify this as a biome. Now, to go over and summarize one final time, an individual is a member or a collection of a set or group, an example being a single type of organism. A population is all organisms of the same species living together in the same area. For example, a pack of lions living together. Now, community is a population of different species living in the same area and interacting with one another. For example, all these animals live together in the African desert. Now, last but not least, biome. A complex community of plants and animals living in a large area having a similar climate. For example, the desert biome is hot and dry with little precipitation. Now, some key concepts to go over. Now, ecosystems are highly variable in both size and biotic and abiotic features. Ecosystems can be very large, such as the ocean, or very small, such as a pond. Now, large ecosystems can include many smaller ecosystems as well, which is a good thing to review. Now, moving on, we are going to go over classifying the following as biotic or abiotic. So we have to classify whether temperature, wind, sunlight, dead leaves, spiders, sand, milk, hair, ice, or plastic are abiotic or biotic. Now let's start with abiotic. Abiotic means something that is non-living. Those would be temperature, wind, sunlight, sand, ice, and plastic. We would consider these abiotic because these are non-living factors in an ecosystem. So temperature is not a living thing. Wind is also not a living thing. Sunlight, sand, ice, and plastic are all not living things. Now moving on to biotic. Factors in an ecosystem we would consider biotic are dead leaves, spiders, milk, and hair. Now, we'd consider dead leaves biotic because it is a type of organic matter, which, as we've discussed earlier, is biotic. Now, spiders are also a living thing, and milk actually has some enzymes and bacteria in it, which make it a biotic feature. Now, hair also has these type of things. As hair is continuously growing, we would consider it biotic since it's not in a single state for its entire life. Now, moving on to some key concepts. Sustainability, which is the ability to maintain an ecological balance. Without interruption or loss of value. Now, to reiterate once more, sustainability is the ability to maintain an ecological balance without interruption or loss of value. Now, moving on to stewardship. Stewardship is a way of acting that involves taking personal responsibility for the care of something. Now, to reiterate once more, to summarize, sustainability is the ability to maintain an ecological balance without interruption of loss or loss of value, and stewardship is a way of acting that involves taking personal responsibility for the care of something. Now, let's move on to another question. Examples of large and small ecosystems to familiarize yourself with abiotic and biotic features. Now, let's list some characteristics about a coniferous forest. Now, some characteristics which are abiotic for a coniferous forest would be long winters, long cold winters, moderate rainfall, and a lot of snow. Now, some biotic features of a coniferous forest would include animals that live there. For example, black bears, squirrels, moose, etc. Now let's move on to another ecosystem, the coral reef. Now let's start with some abiotic features. Warm and shallow waters. And tropical regions. Now, these are all abiotic features because water is not a living thing. We would not consider that a biotic feature, and tropical regions and climate is also not a living thing. Therefore, these are all abiotic features. Now, in the coral reef, some biotic features we can talk about are corals, sponges, and diverse fish. Now, to basically familiarize yourself on qualifying something as a abiotic feature versus a biotic feature in an ecosystem, look for qualities for abiotic features such as temperature, weather, and land bodies itself. And for biotic features, you can look for organisms that live there that we've discussed earlier. Now, for a beaver pond, some abiotic features we can talk about are shallow water, warm summers, and icy winters. Some biotic features we can talk about in beaver ponds are beavers all actually most rodents, turtles, insects, frogs, and other organisms that would be living in that ecosystem. Now finally, let's move on to an interesting one, a rotting log. Now, typically these are for the insects, specifically decomposers. And abiotic feature would be moist environment and very little light. Now, some biotic features could be bacteria, fungi, and insects. So that is how to characterize abiotic features versus biotic features in an ecosystem. Now here are some test questions or review questions that could help us further understand more. First question, how does the atmosphere help provide the conditions necessary for life to exist on Earth? Now, we know that the atmosphere is a layer of gas composed of 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. So the atmosphere acts as a blanket to moderate temperatures which also prevent excessive heating or cooling and blocks harmful UV radiation. So, how does the atmosphere help provide the conditions necessary for life to exist on Earth? The atmosphere acts as a blanket to moderate temperatures, preventing excessive heating or cooling and creating an equilibrium, and also blocks harmful UV radiation. Moving on to question 2. Does a population include abiotic features, biotic features, or both? Explain. Now, let's go back to the definition of a population from earlier. All organisms of the same species living together in the same area. Now, a population is talking about species, and species are biotic features or living things. So, we can conclude that a population includes only biotic features. As it refers to a group of living species of the same species. Now, to not get confused with an ecosystem, because an ecosystem includes abiotic features and biotic features, which includes both. However, a population would only include biotic features because it only refers to specifically a group of living individuals of the same species.